The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
A while ago, we talked extensively about WikiLeaks, and I told you that I believe WikiLeaks was acting in the interests of Russia and of the Trump campaign during the 2016 presidential election and campaign that took place. I made it clear that it's possible that WikiLeaks and Julian Assange didn't know that they were receiving documents from or in some way furthering the interests of Russia in a pro-Trump way. I gave them the benefit of the doubt. As a reminder, the video has now been removed, but Julian Assange was once asked in an interview about this. He said, "Our source for the leaked documents about the DNC, our source is not a state party, so the answer for our interactions is no when it comes to whether Russia was their source." Now, of course, the way he worded it, I believed, was significant. He said, "Our source is not a state party," which could mean two things: that it is someone that is working on the behalf of Russia and feeding information to WikiLeaks. It's also possible that WikiLeaks just didn't know who their source was, and they claim not to know who their sources were. And that's why I was doubting this attempt at separation between Russia and WikiLeaks that Julian Assange attempted, which is, on the one hand, WikiLeaks maintains they don't know who their sources are, but at the same time, they were saying our source on these leaked documents definitely isn't Russia. Well, if you don't know who your sources are, how do you know who it isn't? That was weird. We now have a blockbuster bit of news. I mean, total bombshell that blows the entire Trump-Russia story wide open. U.S. intelligence officials, number one, had previously identified the intermediaries that Russia used as a sort of conduit to get information to WikiLeaks, but we now actually have connections, proven connections, that WikiLeaks was in direct contact with Donald Trump Jr., direct contact with Trump Jr. The contacts are interesting, not necessarily because of the degree of coordination that existed. I'll talk about that a little bit. But it's most interesting because it completely eliminates any doubt that WikiLeaks was acting in the interests of Russia and of the Trump campaign. Let's start with this tweet from Donald Trump, which this was released by Donald Trump Jr., okay? And what basically happened is that as soon as this story broke yesterday, he kind of tried to get ahead of it by showing the chain of messages that he had with WikiLeaks. And the first one that I have on the screen here, it's the WikiLeaks Twitter account asking Donald Trump Jr. to find out about the website putintrump.org. And Donald Trump Jr. replied to WikiLeaks saying he'd look into it. Okay, no big deal. WikiLeaks suggested to Trump Jr. later that they confidentially leak a year or more of Donald Trump's tax returns to them, sort of WikiLeaks becoming more bold in their request to Donald Trump Jr. And WikiLeaks pitched this idea of, hey, everybody's talking about your dad's tax returns. What if you leak some of the tax returns to us? The way WikiLeaks pitched it was as follows, where they said, hey, Don, we have an unusual idea. Leak us one or more of your father's tax returns. If we publish them, it will dramatically improve the perception of our impartiality. That means that the vast amount of stuff that we are publishing on Clinton will have much higher impact because it won't be perceived as coming from a pro-Trump, pro-Russia source, which the Clinton campaign is constantly slandering us with. Let's keep that up just for a moment, Pat. So the defenders are saying that this account is not admitting that they are a pro-Trump, pro-Russia source. They are saying very clearly, the Clinton campaign is slandering us with being a pro-Trump, pro-Russia source. But look at the earlier part. It will improve the perception of our impartiality. So there are people who are seeing this and saying there's nothing to see here. It's merely WikiLeaks acknowledging that they are seen by some as a pro-Trump, pro-Russia source, but that they're really not. This is language that makes it very clear that they are asking for Donald Trump Jr.'s help to take attention away from the growing realization that many had that they are functioning as a conduit to ideas and leaks that would benefit and did benefit both Russia and Trump. Also, the WikiLeaks account suggested to Donald Trump Jr. that if it doesn't go well on election night for Donald Trump, that they should contest the entire election as having been rigged, make a big stink about the election results, and ultimately Donald Trump won, but still pushed the entire rigged election narrative, saying that 3 to 5 million people voted illegally for Hillary Clinton, that he would have won the popular vote in addition to the electoral vote, had it not been for a rigged election with all these millions of people voting illegally or twice or being bussed here or there. And that is exactly what Russia wants. I've said this before. It's not specifically about Trump wanting Russia wanting Trump, rather, Freudian slip there. It's not specifically about Russia wanting Trump to be president only or exclusively because they think that Trump will pass laws that would be good for them. A lot of it is they saw Trump as the incompetent, manipulable fool who would create chaos. He would throw the American democratic system into chaos and potentially even delegitimize it, period. And that's why Russia would have an interest and would have this idea of saying, hey, say that the election was rigged, which is exactly what Donald Trump did after winning the electoral vote, but of course losing the popular vote in November of 2016. When I read the original story about WikiLeaks asking Don Jr. to tell his dad, don't concede if you lose, the first thing I thought of was when Donald Trump said, or refused to say, I will definitely concede if I lose. He said he would evaluate it, and that just rings so true to what it was that WikiLeaks was suggesting that they do. And then we come to the example that really shows, at least to some degree, that the Trump campaign was playing ball with WikiLeaks. On October 12th of 2016, the WikiLeaks Twitter account asked Donald Trump Jr. to have Donald Trump Sr., his dad, tweet about their new John Podesta email leaks. And 15 minutes later, Donald Trump did exactly that. Byron Tao from the Wall Street Journal pointed this out on his Twitter account. He actually put up the side-by-side from the report about what we've learned from WikiLeaks and Donald Trump's eventual tweet. And only 15 minutes after WikiLeaks suggested to Donald Trump Jr. that they tweet about these leaks, Donald Trump sent out a tweet saying, quote, very little pickup by the dishonest media of incredible information provided by WikiLeaks. So dishonest, rigged system. 15 minutes. 15 minutes. And this was effectively similar to what we saw with that meeting with Russian lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya in Trump Tower, 2 hours after Paul Manafort and Jared Kushner and Donald Trump Jr. met with the Russian lawyer in Trump Tower, the meeting where she came promising incriminating dirt on Hillary Clinton. Trump took to Twitter and tweeted at Hillary, how long did it take your staff of 823 people to think that up? And where are your 33,000 emails that you deleted? Just hours after the Trump Tower Russian lawyer meeting. WikiLeaks is simply not an unbiased clearinghouse of information. They are very, very far from that. And this isn't a value judgment that I'm making, right? It's not an indictment of everything that WikiLeaks has ever released. All this means is WikiLeaks is a partial actor that worked during the campaign to further Russian interests vis-a-vis trying to get Donald Trump elected. You can interpret that however you want. You can make whatever value judgment of that you want, but it is beyond denial at this point. And I would add, I want to remind you that Trump-appointed CIA Director Mike Pompeo previously testified that WikiLeaks is a, quote, non-state hostile intelligence service. We now have clear communication between this non-state hostile intelligence service and the presidential campaign of the current president of the United States. That escalates the current investigation being carried out by Robert Mueller significantly. And the major takeaway that I have for you is, do not be tricked into sort of understating the significance of this. Donald Trump Jr. received a suggestion from WikiLeaks and went directly to Donald Trump And Trump did exactly what Assange or WikiLeaks or Russia wanted him to do. Trump complied within 15 minutes and tweeted out a promotion of WikiLeaks' latest John Podesta releases. There is no point at this, there's no way at this point to credibly argue that Trump Sr. had no idea. And I am warning you now, the right and Trump Jr., they're writing this all off as nothing, but it is not nothing. This is evidence of WikiLeaks and the Trump campaign coordinating via Twitter direct message. They are saying, hey, listen, we turned everything over, they being Trump Jr. and his attorney. We turned everything over, so therefore there's nothing to see here, which is a fallacious argument, right? That's like saying, I didn't hide the fact that I murdered someone, therefore there's nothing concerning about the fact that I murdered someone. It doesn't work, okay? And what's next is, Donald Trump Jr., he was a low-level, unpaid part-time volunteer for the Trump campaign. He wasn't authorized to speak to WikiLeaks on our behalf. And anyway, the contacts mean nothing whatsoever. And the response from Assange is riveting. Julian Assange put out a series of tweets where he said, to begin with, I cannot confirm the alleged DMs from Donald Trump Jr. to WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks does not keep such records, and the Atlantic's presentation is edited and clearly does not have the full context. Do you understand how insane that statement is? They don't keep records, but Atlantic's presentation is edited. If you don't keep records, are you just going from memory about how the conversation went? How is that even remotely credible? Then Julian Assange went on to say, WikiLeaks loves its pending publications and ignores those who ask for details. Trump Jr. was rebuffed just like Cambridge Analytica. In both cases, WikiLeaks had publicly teased the publications. Thousands of people asked about them. Assange went on to say WikiLeaks can be very effective at convincing even high-profile people that it is in their interest to promote links to its publications, which of course is kind of in a thinly disguised way saying, yeah, it wouldn't be a surprise if we convinced Trump to tweet out about what we put out there. And then lastly, Julian Assange tweeting, WikiLeaks has such chutzpah that it allegedly tried to convince Trump Jr. to leak his father's tax returns and his own Russian lawyer meeting emails. He did. WikiLeaks appears to beguile some people into transparency by convincing them that it is in their interest. Although, of course, it is WikiLeaks that lacks transparency, saying on the one hand, we have no records of these communications, but we can tell you that the ones that have been published aren't accurate and lack context. On the one hand, they say, we don't know who provides us with the information that we release. But at the same time, they say, but we can assure you that it wasn't actually Russia. And this is part of a long list of contacts with WikiLeaks from the Republican Party. We know that Congressman Dana Rohrabacher met with Julian Assange, offering a deal to potentially absolve him. We've learned that Cambridge Analytica reached out to WikiLeaks and offered to organize their hacked emails. We also know that Cambridge Analytica is part of the Russia probe investigation. And then from the Paradise Papers leak, remember those, covered them last week, that confirms that this Robert Mercer used dark money to fund his efforts to sink Hillary Clinton's campaign, and it's all being written off as some nothing burger, even though we are now able to connect dots that we didn't even know existed. We're living in a historic moment, right? I mean, it's sort of axiomatic to say we are witnessing history. Of course we are. Everything we witness becomes history. But I believe that what we are seeing right now is going to become a very notable part of American history at some point in the future. And, fortunately, the real patriots aren't getting distracted by this. They're busy defending accused child sex assaulter Republican Roy Moore. But we'll talk about the latest allegations there coming up a little later. Send me your thoughts about this. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. Show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is James O'Neill. James, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. Membership and Patreon are how the show is funded. So if you appreciate the show, if you listen, if you watch on YouTube, listen on the radio, podcast, whatever, think about making a contribution like James O'Neill has, davidpakman.com/membership for membership. and patreon.com/David Pakman Show to pledge as little as $1 a month to us. Okay, we've been doing this Jenga tower thing for a while. The way we've been doing it is that for every 2 people that make a contribution at patreon.com/David Pakman Show, I move 1 piece. When we finally have the tower fall, whatever number of pieces I've been able to move, we double it and it becomes a membership discount. Right now, I have moved 26 pieces, meaning if it were to fall after the next move, we would have a 52% discount code for membership. We have 3 more moves to make today. Three more moves to make today. And I don't know that I have any moves I'm going to be able to do before this thing falls. It is very unstable, but Pat, please give me the first 2 names and I will see if I can make something happen here.
We got KDW and Michael Rudge.
Okay. Let's see if there's any piece here. And I know people say, David, you're really supposed to move the first piece you touch and all this different stuff. Listen, I'm trying to get you a bigger membership discount, so don't complain that I am maybe cheating in your favor because, oh my goodness, this is
you're playing against yourself too.
I'm kind of playing against myself. I think I found one here. If I'm able to move this one, it would get us, whoa, this thing is shaky, Pat. It would get us to a 54% membership discount code.
Oh man, I'm nervous.
Pat looks very nervous. Can you see how it's teetering on camera? Because this thing is teetering, teetering, teetering. Whoa. And I am placing it on top, and that is now 27, which gets us to 54%. What's the next name?
Alexander Milichevit and Ryan Richards.
Okay. Can I move another piece here? Let me see if I can move it. Oh my goodness, this is just incredibly unstable. Oh, and it is, I don't even know what piece I might be able to move here. Oh my, this is from the bottom, Pat. This is from the bottom. I think I found one. And I am just very slowly taking it out. And I've almost got it. I'm just slowly, a millimeter at a time, taking this out. And I've done it.
Way.
And I have placed it on top. And we are now down to only 4 single pieces at the bottom holding this up. I've moved 28 pieces, which gets us a 56% discount code.
There's no way.
What are the last 2 names for today?
Edward Duhaime and
I think
Daniel
it's
Long.
Duhaime. Yes.
Edward Duhaime and Daniel Long.
Wow. I don't even know where to go. I know people say I should take the pieces from the top because it's more, it's just a good idea to do that, but they are so locked in, and I am just not sure that I can really do that. Is there another piece here that I could move? Wow. I think I've got one. Oh, it is teetering and tottering. Oh, I think I'm about to slide it out. Look at that, Pat.
You got it.
Look at that. And right on top, that is now 28. Wait, does that make sense? 3, 6, 9, 12. Could it be 28?
28.
29. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Wait, no, I don't think that's right. We had 26, 27. No, it's 29. That is 29, meaning we are now at a 58% discount. I was certain that it would have fallen by now. I was absolutely certain it would have fallen by now, but it is still standing.
I thought it was impossible.
I didn't think it was possible to get this far. I really didn't. So anyway, it lives another day. Patreon.com/David Pakman Show. By the way, we're out of names, so we actually need more contributions now if we are to move more pieces tomorrow. Patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Tomorrow has to be the last day, right?
We should just keep our cameras rolling 24 hours a day.
I'm
because
worried
that
it's
thing
going to
could
fall
at any moment.
I'm worried it's going to fall, yeah. Okay, that is it. Let's continue. More moves tomorrow if we have new Patreon contributors. Okay, the backstory with the Roy Moore sexual assault allegations, of course, 4 accusers of Roy Moore, one of them under Alabama's age of consent. She was 14 years old, the age of consent 16 years old. Now, there have been some defenders and some doubters, people saying things like, hey, 3 of these 4 would have been legal anyway, which is kind of a weird way to defend child sex assault in my mind. But we now have another accuser that has come forward, and this one is not saying that she was involved in a consensual situation with Roy Moore. Beverly Young Nelson of Alabama is accusing Roy Moore of sexually assaulting her when she was 16 years old. If true, this would be 2 instances of unwanted sexual contact with Roy Moore. She was a waitress at the old Hickory House. Moore would come in. Moore offered her a ride home when her boyfriend was running late, and instead of actually driving her home, she says Moore drove her behind the restaurant, parked the car, and sexually assaulted her without consent while she struggled and protested. Her lawyer, Gloria Allred, says that she's willing to answer questions about this incident under oath. And of course, the fact that Gloria Allred is involved immediately is setting off the right. They are saying, oh, Gloria Allred is a bomb thrower. She's leading a witch hunt. She's responsible for the millions of abortions that have taken place because of her support for Roe v. Wade. Can you imagine? Beverly Nelson Young can't be believed about her allegations against Roy Moore because her lawyer believes that abortion should be legal and was an activist for that cause 40 years ago. Guys, he admitted to dating 16-year-olds while he was in his 30s. He's been against statutory rape laws as a judge. Is it crazy to think that a 32-year-old who dates 16-year-olds would try to be with a 14-year-old and maybe try to pull a fast one on a 16-year-old by driving her behind the restaurant? And we have also learned that Roy Moore was banned from a local mall. I don't know where this is going to bottom out. Roy Moore apparently would go hang out at the Gadsden Mall in Alabama. He was a regular there, kind of like a mall rat or something. He would hang out there, and multiple people told the New Yorker that he would be there alone and was ultimately banned from the mall because he was badgering teenage girls, which just sounds about right. It's all part of the exact same thing that we've been hearing. So the only question I have is Roy Moore going to resign? We've heard from a number of Republicans now that it's time for Roy Moore to step aside. And really, the reason I'm not optimistic that this is actually going to destroy his election chances are that in the end, the president of the United States was accused by a dozen or more women of sexual assault, including a 13-year-old girl, right? Can the so-called moral majority Christians admit that they don't really care about their so-called family values? What they care about is winning elections in order to impose their Christian worldview on everybody else. If we can get them to admit that, because that's what a lot of them are thinking, we might understand why this still might not signal the end for Roy Moore. And we will ultimately see what happens. Moore is being hurt in the polls. We talked about that yesterday. He is being asked, implored to resign, even by some Republicans, but I don't know that he will. And we'll continue following it. We'll see if more allegations surface. In the growing list, by the way, of politicians and actors accused of sexual assault and inappropriate touching, former Republican President George H.W. Bush, the father of George W. Bush, is now being accused by 6 women of having groped them. And the latest is Roslyn Corrigan, who was only 16 years old at the time of the alleged incident. Bush was 79 at the time in 2003. This reportedly took place in Texas when she was being photographed standing next to the then former president. 7 different people have corroborated that this is the exact story that Corrigan told them immediately after the alleged incident. There are 5 other women who have made similar claims in recent weeks, and the allegations are very similar every single time, which is Bush grabbed them by the buttocks. It started with one incident which was written off as some kind of avuncular joke. And avuncular, avuncular literally means being of or like an uncle, but it's actually pretty creepy in this case to say that it was just him being avuncular. We can also maybe write part of this off to, advanced age or some kind of subclinical dementia or something like that, but it's going beyond that with these mounting allegations. This is coming from people in different walks of life, of different ages, and the explanation from the Bush camp is sort of an affirmative defense. The Bush camp has said he does pat women's rear, but he sees it as sort of just a good-natured thing that he does, and he apologizes to anyone who might have been offended by that touching. Is this different because Bush is older, 93 years old? I don't know. I mean, it's not really different because he's older, but certainly it's true that if he never did this stuff before age 79, and it seems to have taken place almost exclusively between 79 and 93, we know about this being sort of common behavior at nursing homes, this hypersexuality that sometimes happens in people with, again, not necessarily diagnosed dementia, but subclinical, right? Some low baseline level of dementia that is very common in people as they age. The hypersexual nursing home resident stuff is an issue that's often dealt with. And I keep coming back to, if it doesn't really seem that people care about this as a collective, they're really not going to care about a few incidents from George H.W. Bush. You do get outraged individuals when you hear stories like this. And most people say this is bad, it's not desirable. But by and large, if as a society we cared that much about men in power doing this stuff, President Donald J. Trump would not be President Donald J. Trump, right? And we can say, well, this person suffered the consequences. Kevin Spacey, Bill Cosby, who else? Who else has suffered the consequences of this stuff? There's many of them. But at the bottom line, if President Donald Trump became president, despite the fact that he admitted to doing this type of stuff, despite the fact that he had an accuser as young as 13 years old say that he raped her, it is really vile that this is going on in so many different places. Bush admitted it and made it seem like these are friendly pats on the butt. But how can we really think that society is going to take this seriously when we have President Donald Trump, despite more than a dozen allegations of sexual assault and unwanted sexual conduct? Send me your thoughts. What do you think? What, if anything, can be done about this? DavidPakman.com/Reddit is where almost 5,000 of our viewers and listeners are discussing this and many other topics from today's show. Join us there. We'll take a break and be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Mark Godsey, who's the co-founder of the Ohio Innocence Project, which to date has freed 25 wrongly convicted people from prison who served a combined 470 years. He's also author of Blind Injustice. A former prosecutor exposes the psychology and politics of wrongful convictions. So much to talk about here, Mark. I really appreciate you joining me. Let's first start with how you got into even the idea of working to help free people who have been wrongly imprisoned.
Well, it's actually an interesting story because it's kind of by accident. I was a prosecutor in New York City for many years and was prosecutor, very hard-nosed, enjoyed my job, but wanted to go into academia and be a criminal law professor. And so the first job I got was actually at a different school than where I am now. That the first year I was there, they had a pre-existing innocence project, and the professor who ran it was on sabbatical my first year. So the dean comes up to me and is like, hey, you know, you're the new crim guy. You've got criminal investigation experience in your background, so you're going to have to run this innocence project. And I didn't say this out loud, but I sort of thought to myself, oh my gosh, I can't really say no, but what a stupid idea, because I didn't think innocent people got convicted. And I remember going to the first meeting with the students, and they had gone to prison and interviewed this inmate named Herman May, and they were going on and on about how they were so convinced he was innocent. And I remember just, asking about the case and just thinking, oh my God, these students are so naive. This guy's totally guilty. But then DNA testing was done, and it excluded him from the crime scene evidence. He was exonerated and released. And so it's really just sort of, I call the first chapter of the book eye-opener, because that's what that first year was, a huge eye-opener, that I never would have ever sort of been enlightened about this problem had I not been forced into it. And so that year I went through a sort of a year of discovery. The next year I got a job at the University of Cincinnati Law School, which is my hometown. And Ohio was the largest state that didn't have an innocence project. And so I was such a believer in that 1 year of time that I founded the one here with John Cranley, who's now the mayor of Cincinnati. And so we've been in operation now since 2003.
And you said something interesting, which is that when you were a prosecutor, you didn't believe that innocent people got convicted. Did you not ever have a case that you prosecuted where you had doubts as to the guilt of the accused?
Well, that's one of the things that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, is because at the time, no. I mean, in our mentality in the office, it was everybody brought to us by the police or by the FBI agents or whatever. They're obviously guilty. There was no sort of open-mindedness to us whatsoever. But now that I've been doing innocence work, I've been on the other side for all these years. I look back on some of my cases and the mentality I had, and I'm open to questioning. And I certainly am concerned about some of the ways that I behaved as a prosecutor, and I saw other prosecutors behave around me. And so in many ways, the book is a confessional and a memoir. I cut back and forth between innocence work and sort of the way I see police and prosecutors behave that cause these wrongful convictions. And I cut back to, the way it was when I was in the prosecutor's office and how we did those very same things. And so In chapter 7 of the book, I talk about one of the cases where I very well now, looking back at it with a more objective mind, the guy might be innocent. I don't know. I really had tunnel vision. I spun the evidence, and I wasn't open-minded about it. Any evidence that came forward, I was going to spin it in a way to make it look guilty, which is what everyone did in my office, and what I see happen that causes these wrongful convictions now. So, it's certainly a complete metamorphosis in my frame of mind, I would say.
So we'll get to how the Innocence Project works a case and how you get some of these convictions, get some of these people freed. But before we get to that, let's talk first a little bit about how people are wrongfully convicted to begin with. Is it a combination of circumstance, prosecutorial techniques, the plea agreement industrial complex, or call it whatever it is you want to call it? Talk to us a little bit about how people end up being wrongly convicted.
Yeah, I mean, it's a variety of factors. And you talked about, the plea bargain machine that we have. A lot of innocent people plead guilty, but, the ones we're finding are from the people that didn't plead guilty, because trying to undo pleas is so difficult at this point. Our criminal justice system is really not ready to accept it. It's very, very difficult. And so, we've had over 2,000 exonerations in the innocence movement in the past 25 years. Almost all of those, the vast majority of those, are from people who did not plead guilty. And something like 96% of people plead guilty. So we're getting all these exonerations out of the small percentage, like 4%, that actually went to trial. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it just tells you that the number of people who pled guilty that we can't even touch their cases is very troubling. It's a variety of things. I mean, I think the biggest misconception, and I deal with this in my book, is that the public sort of thinks, and the families of the wrongfully convicted think, this is like evil people and the prosecutors are doing this on purpose. A lot of it is just mentality and psychology. There was a great arrogance in our system. These, prosecutors and judges and even defense attorneys become bureaucrats after a while. They're just sort of going through the motions. They're not looking at the evidence objectively anymore. They assume everybody's guilty. And so they're not sitting there, thinking, ha, 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 I'm going to convict an innocent person. They just become closed-minded, and they become so biased in their evaluation of the cases that they're no longer looking at them objectively and fairly. And I talk about how I did that as a prosecutor. It's tunnel vision. It's confirmation bias. There's a whole chapter on how confirmation bias affects the judgments of police and prosecutors and even forensic experts. The system, basically what it comes down to is our criminal justice system right now is operating on an understanding of the human mind, understanding of psychology from the 1800s, or at best the 1950s. And our understanding of the human mind has changed so much, but the criminal justice system hasn't caught up. So, for example, wrongful convictions are caused, many of them, by human memory problems. Eyewitnesses are so easily open to suggestion, and you can, as a prosecutor and a police officer, you can bend their statements to fit your theories of the case. But we tend to, in the court system, think that eyewitnesses come and testify and say, I'm 100% positive that's the guy did it. But that's ironclad evidence. It's actually really weak evidence, because, human memory is very, very weak, and particularly the way we handle it in the criminal justice system, we contaminate it.
And what would be an example of the opposite? I'm interested, because obviously the idea that someone comes in and says, I'm 100% sure this is how it happened, we know that that's not really the case. But can you give us an example of how a prosecutor might take a witness that does not seem to have 100% recollection and use the power of suggestion to create a particular impression upon the jury? How would you do that?
I talk about this all the time. I mean, I did it as a prosecutor. I saw it done around me all the time. I'll give you a perfect example, and I give many of them in the book. You got a case where you think the murder happened at 11 o'clock. And, the guy who's your suspect was in the bar that evening. And so you pull a couple witnesses in. And the first couple people who were in the bar that day say, yeah, I think he left around 10:30. And he came back around 11:30. And so as a prosecutor, you're going, bingo, right? That's perfect. He was gone right when the murder happened. He had time to get there, to commit the murder, and get back. You call the third witness in, and the third witness goes, you know what? He was there till midnight. Well, what does that mean for you as a police officer or prosecutor? That's an alibi. That means the guy couldn't have done it. And so in the mind frame you're in as a police officer or prosecutor, you just assume this person has to be wrong. And so you start grilling them. Are you sure? Think really hard, because, other people are telling us blah, 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 blah. And it doesn't take that much to get some witnesses, and many witnesses will start bending. And they'll start saying, the more I think about it, you're probably, I think he had left by the time the football game was over. And it starts to line up now with the time frame that the prosecution had all along.
Now, Mark, is it just on a procedural question? Is it allowed to reference other testimony to someone you're questioning in that way? Is it okay to say, well, other witnesses have said this other thing?
You're not supposed to. There's no official rule against it. I mean, the defense attorney can get on the stand and say, did they suggest to you what to say? Did they tell you what other witnesses are saying?
Right.
And some witnesses might say, yeah, they said that, but it didn't affect didn't affect me. Or they may say, no, they never told me that. But they can be done more subtly. You can, if you're a prosecutor or police officer and you're asking those pointed questions over and over again, you don't even have to say that's what other witnesses are telling us. You can be looking at each other. The prosecutor looks at the police officer and they stare at each other and they just shake their heads in disbelief. The witness gets the message after a while that they're wrong and that they should be really thinking about it. And then you come back to me and say, look, I want you to think really hard about this. That's not jiving up with what we're hearing. This happens. And what I talk about in the book that is even more alarming is, in my prosecutor's office, when a witness changed their statement through our prodding, it was often the case that we didn't write it down. We didn't write down what their first statement was. So the defense attorney at trial never finds out that there was an evolution. So doesn't get a chance to cross-examine them and say, hey, wait a minute, didn't you first say that he was there until midnight? That means he couldn't have committed the murder. And when I first started, I was told, don't write that down, because you got to really prod a witness on their memory and to help them understand and help them remember and help them understand how serious this is to tell the truth. And once you get them, once they come to Jesus, which means give the right answer they're supposed to give or you want them to give, then you write it down. But anything before that is just an offhand comment. It's not official. You really have to prod their memory first. And at the time, I didn't understand how malleable human memory was. So I sort of bought into the theory, we really know what happened. We've got the whole file. This guy, if he says something that disagrees with what we think, he's dead wrong. And so it's our job to correct him. Now that I understand human memory better, I understand how we were doing what's called, I call in the book, synthesized testimony. We were creating testimony to fit our theory of the case.
We're speaking with Mark Godsey, who's co-founder of the Ohio Innocence Project. The book is Blind Injustice. A former prosecutor exposes the psychology and politics of wrongful convictions. We'll pause our conversation with him and continue with more tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So right now there is an all-time historic record high in terms of the number of people outside of the workforce. 95.3 million people are outside of the workforce under Donald Trump. Now, this might sound weird, right? Because we keep hearing that the unemployment rate is down and we're seeing sort of steady job creation, albeit maybe a little below expectations. How could it be that we have this 95.3 million number in terms of people out of work under Trump, a record, especially when under Obama, it was the only thing we would hear about from Republicans. Every time we had good economic news under President Obama, we'd hear on Fox News and from other right-wing media, record number of people out of the labor force. And that's exactly the point of the story. That number was deceptive under Obama, and it's deceptive under Trump, but you only heard it from right-wing media under President Barack Obama. And we have the latest data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it is very clear that the truth is the number of people out of the workforce, as those who are watching with us can see on this graph, the number of people out of the workforce has been steadily climbing for a long time, even before Obama was president, right? I mean, this graph goes back to January of 2007. A full 2 years before President Obama took over. But the truth is, and I've been consistent about it, this is not a good evaluation of the economy. It's not a good evaluation under a Democratic president, and it's not a good evaluation under a Republican president. And you might be saying, David, explain to me, how can the unemployment rate go down, job creation numbers be positive, and yet we still have a rising number of people not in the workforce? And that's the conversation you never heard from the right under Obama. I tried to explain this to the right-wingers and those insisting on these conspiracy theories. But I'm sure that if you presented these numbers to the Trump administration now, all of a sudden they would say, oh, no, that number is misleading, and we'll tell you exactly why. There are signs of economic prosperity that pull people out of the labor force, and there are signs of economic downturn that pull people out of the labor force. I'll give you some examples, right? When you stop looking for work, you're no longer considered unemployed, but you aren't in the labor force anymore either. So you increase the number of people who are out of the labor force. If the economy is so bad that people can't find jobs for a long time and they become discouraged and stop looking for work, they exit the labor force. And that would be an example of when a growing number of people out of the labor force indicates a bad economy. But here's a counterexample. When the economy is good and people are more employed and earning more money, you have situations where one of the two people in a relationship would be able to afford not working anymore and, for example, going back to school or just taking care of the kids. That is an example of a reduction to the labor force, but it's because the economy is doing well that they can afford to get out of the labor force. Another example, full-time undergraduate college students are part of what the labor force measures. If you're in college and you're not working, you're out of the labor force. You're one of those 95.3 million. The problem is that if the economy is better, you are more likely to be able to afford just to go to school full time and not have to work. In other words, if your parents, for example, are doing better economically because they're both employed in a strong economy, you as a college student don't have to work. It's because the economy is better that you're not working, but you're adding to the number of people out of the workforce. See where I'm going with this? The labor force numbers include retirees. When the economy is better, more people can afford to retire. Why would we say that that's a bad sign for the economy? And lastly, when you have a bigger and bigger population like the US has, even if you hold the percentage of the country that's out of the labor force even, over time, because our population grows, you would have more and more people nominally in raw numbers outside of the labor force. So we have to understand how these numbers are created because neither party will consistently tell us the truth. They'll selectively either give or withhold information about the labor force participation rate and use those numbers to their advantage. And something that has been used, it was used for 8 years to slam President Obama during really a pretty good economy. It no longer matters because Trump is president of the United States. It's sort of like the debt under Republicans. Under Obama, the only issue is the debt, even though he reduced the deficit. And under Trump, tax plan, health plan that will blow up the deficit, but all of a sudden Republicans don't care about that. Understand the numbers to understand why it's so deceptive. Our favorite show, Fox and Friends, hosted by Steve Doocy, Ainsley Earhart, and Brian Kilmeade, it's always good for a laugh. And after the Sutherland Springs, Texas mass shooting, they came up with, I guess they were looking for some kind of silver lining or something about that horrible terrorist act of shooting. And what they found was that the people at the church who were shot were doing the right thing because they were close to Jesus at the time that they got shot. That's, I guess what they're saying is, if you're going to be shot, being at church is a good thing. Here's the clip from Fox and Friends.
Governor, you know, we've been reporting this shouldn't happen in a church, but I was downstairs talking with some people that work here that we all talk about our faith and we share the same beliefs. We were saying there's no other place we would want to go other than church because I'm there asking for forgiveness. I feel very close to Christ when I'm there. So I'm trying to look at some positives here and know that those people are with the Lord now and experiencing eternity and no more suffering, no more sadness anymore.
Right, so there's that. That's a clip not from Pat Robertson's 700 Club show. Okay, that's from Fox News, one of the 3 major cable news stations in the country, and it is nauseating. If I had to get first of all, let's talk about the specifics, right? If I had to get shot somewhere, I'd want to be shot at a hospital, right? But that assumes that language is the language. When we say people are going to be shot, you're already assuming that, right? That there's not even a possibility of maybe people not being shot in mass shootings. Hey, it's America. People are going to be shot. The conversation is, where would we rather be when we get shot? But if you really want to go down this path of since they were in church and shot, they're now living suffering-free eternities in heaven with Jesus Christ, why did God allow church-going Christians to be shot in the first place, right? Why would God do that? Oh, well, God works in mysterious ways. That is the cop-out to end all cop-outs from people like Ainsley Earhart, who was downstairs talking to other Fox News staffers who share her faith. The real question is not, do you go to heaven faster if you're shot dead in a church? It's where was God during the shooting, if not in a Christian church on a Sunday morning? Fox News is basically like a half step away from asking for donations so that they can spread the gospel of Jesus Christ at this point. She talks about wanting to find something positive in the mass shooting. It's a mass shooting. Why would there be anything positive? The only positive thing I can think of is that there are some people who didn't die but were merely injured because the guy had only semi-automatic weapons instead of fully automatic weapons, right? That's the only very concocted, forced silver lining that I can find here. Not that at least when you're shot in church, you're close to Jesus. And the scariest part of this, you were telling me this, Pat, I guess the New York Times wrote that Fox and Friends, in a sense, is like the most powerful show or very powerful because Trump watches it on a regular basis. That's the scariest thing I can think of.
Very scary thing.
Is he watching this every day? Do we know?
Just about, I would imagine, right?
I
think
think
it's his
that
favorite show.
They, I'm guessing that in his propaganda file, because this program, doesn't it start at like 4 or 5 in the morning? It's on very, very early. I'm guessing that in Trump's 9:30 a.m. propaganda file, or 9 a.m., he gets lots of screenshots from Fox and Friends.
I wonder if this means he's not watching Morning Joe anymore.
Oh, he's totally off Morning Joe because Mika was bleeding badly from a
facelift.
From a facelift. And what was the other
Crazy
stuff?
Joe.
Crazy Joe Scarborough.
They're not happy with him.
And what else? No, he's completely off. That show starts really early as well, I think. Who's up this early? I don't even know who watches these programs. Although I read on the internet of people that get up extremely early. I have read about them. I'm not totally unfamiliar with that. So anyway, there it is, Fox News, indistinguishable, not from a parody, but from the 700 Club with Pat Robertson, now saying if you're going to get shot, a church is the place because you will be close to Jesus Christ. And I guess that'll shorten your commute into heaven or something. I don't even know what she's talking about. Okay, 2 voicemails today. We have been doing this Jenga thing where for every 2 Patreon contributions, I pull a Jenga piece, and eventually, when this falls, we'll double the number of moves I was able to make and create a membership discount code. So right now, we are at 29.
Yes.
Yeah, I keep getting confused. We've moved 29 pieces, meaning if on the next move the tower falls, we do a 58% membership discount code. Here's one idea for what I should do next to promote Patreon contributions.
Hey, David, I was thinking about it, and I think after you're done with the Jenga game to raise Patreon subscribers, you should bring a Keurig machine in, and once you hit 2,500 patrons, you up the ante, and you and Pat destroy a Keurig machine on an episode. Yeah, that might bring people in. Baba Booey to you. Bye.
Thank you. I am not, that might be the first time we've been Baba Booeyed. And I actually, no, I think the late, great Joey Boots, who sadly passed some months ago, maybe even more than a year ago, who was a big, he was a Howard Stern whack packer and also a fan of the David Pakman Show. I think he Baba Booeyed us once. I'm not exactly sure about that. Yeah, that I would be up for that. It reminds me of this scene in Office Space where they get this copier that always jams and they beat the thing to hell in a field with baseball bats. We could get a Keurig and we could destroy it. Although now Keurig is friendly to us because they're participating in boycotting the Sean Hannity program in terms of advertising.
I mean, my first thought was, why would I want to destroy a Keurig? Because I love Keurig.
Yeah,
but then I realized you also didn't want to come in with your hair out of control either.
Yeah, it's the idea, I think, would be we do something that we wouldn't really like doing normally. And Pat would rather pull a cup of coffee out of the Keurig than actually destroy the thing. But that's one possibility. Here's another idea for what we could do when the Jenga tower ultimately falls.
David, your next stretch goal for your Patreon subscribers should be to shave your head. I think everybody would like to see you look like that on TV.
Yeah. You know,
shave it on TV, on air.
Yeah.
That'd be even funnier.
So at 2,000 patrons, I puffed my hair without any product, and we did that early last week. And the idea here is, what if I agreed to shave my head fully on camera for the next Patreon goal? I am going to be super upfront. I'm willing to consider that, but it's got to be
way.
something like 5,000 or 7,500 patrons.
You would shave your head.
I would consider shaving my head because, listen, if we got to like 7,500 patrons, the level of financial independence that we would have would be significant. And listen, I'll wear a hat for a few months until it grows back. Like I would be willing to shave my head on the show, and sort of see. But it would really have to be worthwhile. It would probably have to be like 7,500 patrons or something like that.
That's commitment, David.
I don't know. I'm not committing to it right now. I'm saying that if there's a desire for it and we establish some number of patrons that's logical, it's on the table. Shaving the head is on the table. Okay, on the bonus show today, we will talk about Elizabeth Warren walking back her claim that the Democratic primary was rigged. We'll talk about NASA helping Uber to bring flying taxis to Los Angeles. And also, a really weird mask has cracked iPhone X's facial ID. All of those stories and more on the bonus show. 2 ways to get the bonus show: davidpakman.com/membership and patreon.com/davidpakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.